trenches. Let's make a righteous ruckus.
Hey, welcome to this episode of the Righteous Ruckus podcast. I'm your host once again, Riley Lowe. Thank you for joining me today. If this is your first time, welcome. If this is not your first time, I'm sorry you've had to endure so many. I think this is episode 80. 80. That's impressive. Today I want to talk about divide and conquer. Remember, you've heard that term before. It's a lot of times it's either politics or, especially in military strategy, right? Divide and conquer. If you can get what's a huge thing separated up into smaller things, kind of some division there. And really, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and this is in complete contrast or completely in the face of the common belief in most pulpits today, or the common teaching in most pulpits today, that whether you want to call it the Oprah Winfrey ministry or the Joel Osteen ministry, whatever you want to call it, where it's more like Jesus is just all about love, and he just wants you to be healthy, wealthy, and wise, and everything's great. And Jesus, it doesn't matter how you come to Jesus as long as you come to Jesus. And that's all that matters, is Jesus understands. That is a huge thing right there. God understands me. God understands me. He understands me. He knows that it ain't no big deal. He knows that, I may sin and do this, but God understands. Well, actually, God does understand that you do it, but he also calls you to be infinitely more holy than that. So there's zero excuses to wallow around in the pigsty. If you think back to the prodigal son, right? There's no reason to wallow around in the pigsty in your sin instead of running home to the Father. That's where we need to be, running home to the Father. And so actually that's one more parable, or one more thing that I'm going to bring. It kind of tie into this. Sorry, I hit the mic there. But divide and conquer. People think, and a lot of modern churches kind of teach that whole, everything's going to be puppy dogs and rainbows because of Jesus. And Jesus is nice, and Jesus is just so loving. He's like a grandpa that just wants you to eat candy all day and be happy, right? And that's not the case at all. That's not the case, because God is loving, but we often conflate, like I mentioned before, we conflate love with approval. In this culture, we do it all the time. Love and approval. Love is not approval. Approval is approval. Love is wanting what's best for the other person, which may mean telling them the truth, right? Not approving of sin, but telling them the truth about sin, or about a behavior, or about certain things. And we get those truths from the Bible. But Jesus actually came to divide. How do I know that Jesus came to actually divide? Because we think, oh, well, that doesn't sound very loving. That doesn't sound like the Jesus I've seen in the perfectly airbrushed portraits on Hobby Lobby store shelves. That doesn't look like that Jesus. The Jesus that looks like, as the way I've mentioned before on this podcast, that oftentimes he's portrayed like a weak vegan, right? That looks like he hasn't had any sustenance, hadn't had any meat in a while. When in reality, the dude was not weak. The dude was anything but in the whatever you want to call it, whatever the styles are that portray Jesus, it's just a limp-wristed, weak, gaunt-looking person, and that's not Jesus. You read the scriptures, that's not Jesus. But people have that picture in their mind, and then I don't think they intentionally do it, but a lot of people, they intentionally overlay that picture on the scriptures. And they, instead of seeing Jesus through the scriptures and actually what did he say and what did he do, they tend to lay that picture over the scriptures and think, well, but Jesus was just so nice. Jesus was just such a nice guy. And he was. and he is, and he's awesome. But it's completely contrary to what the culture thinks of him and preaches of him most of the time. So let's dive into a few scriptures here. Now, why would I say that Christ came to divide? Let's see here. These letters happen to be written in red, and this is in Luke 12, verses 49 through 53. This is a quote. I came to send fire on the earth, and how I wish it were already kindled. But I have a baptism to be baptized with, and how distressed I am till it is accomplished. He's talking about death, burial, and resurrection, dying for our sins, dying for the sins of you and me, paying our sin debt. Do you suppose that I came to give peace on earth? I tell you, not at all, but rather division. That's the words of Jesus. For from now on, 5 in one house will be divided, 3 against 2, and 2 against 3. Father will be divided against son, and son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. He came to divide. How do I know that? Because he said, not at all, but rather division. He came to sow division. He came not to give peace on the current earth. He will ultimately give peace on the earth once he descends from heaven in his second coming and his foot rests on the Mount of Olives and he wipes out all of his enemies with one word or one phrase, or the sword, as it's described in Revelation, the sword that's coming out of his mouth. He will wipe out all of his enemies. Well, then I guess peace will be upon the earth. That's called the millennial reign. Now, that is not currently where we reside. So in his first coming, he came to sow division. Division in, what do I mean by that? Division in those that believe in Jesus versus those that are opposed Jesus. And you may say, well, I don't necessarily, I think Jesus was a good teacher, kind of like, a lot of people think that. The Muslims will kind of hail him as a prophet. Oh, he's just one of the prophets. I heard an interview with a guy that practices the Sikh religion. It's a small religion in India. And, they wear turbans too, traditionally. But he was talking about, well, we've got a lot of the leaders, a lot of kind of these religious teachers, kind of like Jesus is one of many, good teachers. Well, you can't put Jesus in the good teacher box and don't count him as God, because he claimed to be God. If he claimed to be God and he's not God and he's just a good teacher, well, then he's not a good teacher because he's not God. Okay, I hope that wasn't too fast for you. That was a pretty quick chain of logic. So let's look at some more words in red. I just love the words in red because they address this issue straight from the proverbial horse's mouth. Not to be a heretic and call Jesus a horse, but to just use the proverbial phrase. So let's look at Matthew 12. Matthew 12, verse 30. He who is not with me is against me, and he who does not gather with me scatters abroad. You cannot be sort of on Jesus' side. You can't be not really for Jesus, but yeah, I'm in the middle. There is no, this right here, this statement, Matthew 12, verse 30, who is not with me is against me. Not he who is not with me is either undecided or against me, is either in the gray area or against me, is either in some middle ground and just really irrelevant or against me. He who is not with me is against me. There is no middle ground. There is zero middle ground. And he who is not gather with me scatters abroad. So you say, well, I'm not on Team Jesus, but I'm not opposed to it. Well, guess what? If you are not sold out for Jesus, you are working actively against him in your life. You are actively working against him. And it's not cool. It's not cool. Let's look at another example here in the parable of the wheat and the tares. Now, almost all of these parables that he gives throughout his ministry are talking about either two or more options, and there's only one option, or maybe two options in some of them, that are the option that you need to be doing. All right. And so here he says, this is the parable of the wheat and the tares. Tares is like weeds or rye or something that's not wheat, but looks like wheat, right? Another parable, this is Matthew 13, verses 24 through 30. Another parable he put forth to them, saying, quote, "The kingdom of heaven is like a man who has sowed good seed in his field. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. But when the grain had sprouted and produced a crop, the tares also appeared. So the servant of the sower came and said to him, 'Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? And how does it have tares?' He said to them, 'An enemy has done this.' The servant said to him, 'Do you want us to go and gather them up?' But he said, 'No, lest while you gather up the tares, you also uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. And at that harvest time, I will say to the reapers, first, gather the tares, bind them in the bundles, and burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn.'" That's a perfect word example spoken in an agrarian culture where those people knew what wheat are and tares are. They've experienced the similar thing, and they know, they can see this word picture. It really brings this juxtaposition of being with Jesus or against Jesus into fulfillment here, where they can actively see, okay, I understand what he's saying there. He's saying there's going to be bad stuff, bad people that you can't tell them apart a lot of times from the good people until they mature. But once they mature, and there's only going to be the good ones that are truly, truly, truly wheat and not tares. Truly the wheat will be gathered into the barn, harvested into the barn, kept. Think about going into the kingdom of heaven, into Jesus's barn, and then the rest of them are going to be burned. The wheat, the weeds and the tares and the rye and the junk is going to be burned, gathered up and burned. That induces images of hellfire there. And then on the last part here, I want to talk about here. This is Romans 12. So we're leaving the words of Jesus and we're going just into the inspired word here in Romans 12. This is the Apostle Paul, where he says, Romans 12, 1 and 2. "I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." Transformed. Remember, I grew up in the 80s, and of course they all made a comeback, the Transformers, right? Where you got these robots that they transform from a robot into a car, or a car into a robot, right? If you've got a car sitting there and you got a car that turns into a robot, it's no longer a car, it's a robot, right? So that's what we are called to do as we accept and become justified through the Holy Spirit by believing in Jesus and trusting in God and believing and accepting the free gift of salvation. We can be transformed into something new, be born again, is one of the way Jesus describes it, be born again. And when you're born again, you are a new creation. When you were born the first time, you became a unique human being. When you're born again, you are, essentially born spiritually into a new creation. What your desires, you may have desired sin before. You should, I almost said increasingly decrease. That would have been weird. So you more and more, you despise sin as you become sanctified, right? You become justified at the moment of your salvation. And then the rest of your life, you're going to be sanctified, becoming more and more and more like Christ. If you're a man, you're becoming more like a man of God. If you're a woman, you're becoming more of a woman of God. You're striving the rest of your life to become more and more like Christ. And you will never ultimately, spoiler alert here, you will never ultimately get there. Never. However, we will be stepping into eternity at some point. Rather, I've heard it said, my pastor uses this, I think he got it from somewhere else, but by rupture or by rapture, we will enter into eternity. In other words, your body is going to give way, or the rapture is going to happen. And one way or another, we're going to enter into eternity. And that is when you will become glorified. You'll receive glorified bodies, just like it says in Acts, I believe, that we will become like him. I think it's in Acts. We're talking about the resurrection. Anyway, it may be at the end of the Gospels, but in any event, we will receive a glorified body that is very, very, very similar, if not identical, to Christ's resurrected body. That is what we're looking forward to. Oh my goodness! Whenever I'm got aches and pains and everything else, I actually just had a scare the other day. Talked to my wife. Potentially another cancer scare. But anyway, that's kind of beside the point there. I don't want to go down that rabbit trail too far because it turned out to be nothing. But it was a reminder. It was a great reminder. I will get into that at some point and kind of talk about that. But it made my heart stop, made my gut sink, my stomach sink down, and it was really a gut punch into reality of reminding me of the cancer battle and reminding me of the impact of it emotionally, physically, and spiritually. But I'm so looking forward to that transformed body, that glorified body. That glorification is what we will be residing in for eternity once we get there, right? Once we leave this world. So that's why it says, do not be conformed to this world. You are supposed to be living in this world, but you are separate. You are divided from the unbelievers of this world. And ultimately, where is it in Revelation where it talks about the sheep and goats, dividing the sheep and the goats, right? The sheep are going to enter into the kingdom of heaven. The goats, not so much. So you just gotta, when you read the words of Jesus, you can peel back, you can peel off that overlay, that filter. We live in the social media world. I don't really know a whole lot about these filters that people do, but they make themselves look like a dog or look like they got weird teeth and all sorts of crazy stuff. I don't know how to do all that stuff because I may have a podcast, but I'm not the most technological savvy person in the world. However, that being said, you get to take that filter off of the scriptures that show Jesus just all, sometimes with a little halo on, and he just looks so sad. Looks like he's about ready to cry, right? And you get to see the true Jesus, and the true Jesus that really, if you really break it down, he looks at our lives and he can see our lives and he can see our sin nature. And he was actually brokenhearted enough to come put on human flesh and live the perfect life, to die the perfect death, to be the perfect sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice for our sins. And we get to see that Jesus, and not the meek and the mild or the gaunt and the malnourished Jesus that is pictured everywhere and is preached everywhere. And I've heard it said, well, I'm not going to get into that I heard a guy once say that if you walked into and you listened to the most of the services in this world and the churches of this age, it's some sort of weird, and you listen to the music, it's like almost some sort of weird homoerotic experience going on there. Like they're obsessed with this weird, effeminate version of Jesus that's really not accurate at all, because Jesus was a guy's guy. Jesus was he could go, man, he could go fishing, he could go hunting. I mean, the dude ran, he could call out demons, he could build you a house. The dude's dad was a carpenter, I mean, and I'm not, trust me, I'm not trying to be a heretic by calling Jesus a dude. I'm just using the vernacular. But I mean, Jesus was awesome is what I'm saying. Jesus was awesome. Jesus is awesome. Jesus is sitting in the right hand of God, intercessing in prayer. He's awesome. Jesus is awesome. And once you realize that, and you realize that, I mean, there is no amalgamizing. I think I just made a new word. Amalgamizing, right? You're meshing and mucking, like when my daughters, right? They're young, and when they get, you could give them 3 new different colors of Play-Doh, and within a couple hours, it's all going to be one new color of meshed up, mucked up stuff. You can't combine worldliness and the holiness of Jesus Christ into that. They don't mix. It's oil and water. They do not mix. And so they will always be separate. They'll always be separate. And that's what Jesus has come to do, is to point out that there is no middle ground. You're either on his side of the fence or you're not on his side of the fence. There is no straddling the fence. All right. You're either for Jesus or you're actively working against him. You're not on the sidelines. If you're on the sidelines, you're actively working against him. So I just want to close out. I want to hammer that home today because it's really contrary to what a lot of people are preaching today and what a lot of people will say to you. And so I want to close out using my new close, which I love, Romans 12:12. What should we be doing in the meantime between now and the time we step into eternity? We should be rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, and continuing steadfastly in prayer.